All right, so today we're going to be continuing to talk about cattle trails. We started talking about cattle trails yesterday, and we learned about the Chisholm Trail and the cowboys and how there was so much beef in the South, especially in Texas. They had a ton of cattle and a ton of beef, and over in the East, they hardly had any beef at all. So those cowboys and those ranchers, they decided that they needed to get that beef over in the East because they were trying to make some money. Because remember, it was $4. A cow was worth $4 in Texas, but that same cow was worth $40 over in the East. So they got creative and they said, hey, we're going to have a cattle drive, and some of us are going to go up the Chisholm Trail, and we're going to go from Texas up to Kansas and then hop on that railroad, and that railroad will take our cattle over to the East, and we will make some money. That was their goal. Well, today, you guys are going to be given your own map of the United States through Google Classroom. It will be on a Google slide as an assignment. And I'm going to kind of go through and explain what you're going to be doing with your map. And if you need to, you can rewatch this video, or you can label your map at the same time that I'm talking, and you can pause and whatever you need to do. But you will be turning in that map to me for a little classwork grade. So if we look here, your map will look very similar to this, cattle trails. And you'll notice down here that you have a map key. It's important that you have a key on a map so that way we know what you're talking about. Because if you draw a orange line from Texas to Kansas, that's the Chisholm Trail, and you don't label it or you don't tell me what that orange color means, I'm just going to think it's an orange line. Somebody else may do the Chisholm Trail in pink or in orange, or in blue. So I have to know what you're doing on your map. So it's really important to use this key and label your map. So that's what your map looks like. The first thing that you need to do is label these 13 states. So this would be a good time right now to pause the video, and you can use your, in Google Classroom, on Google Slides, you can create a text box, and you can label each of these states, these 13 states. These are really important states because we're going to be labeling some other things, and they might go through some of these states. So go ahead and make sure you have that labeled. The next thing that you're going to need to label is cities in California. So California is all the way over across the United States. It is in the west. And there are two main cities that you're going to have to label on your map, and that is San Francisco and Los Angeles. So again, you can use your text box and you can create one, and then you can label that way. And if you'd like to make a shape like a circle and pinpoint the dot, you can. And it doesn't have to be exactly how this one is. If it's a little off, that's okay. Just make sure you have it in the same area. All right, so the next thing you're going to need to do is label. Once you have Utah, you're going to draw a blue rectangle in Utah, and this is going to represent the Great Salt Lake. So you can make a text box and you can shade it in blue, or you can create a square and shade it in blue, however you would like to do it. Make sure that is blue. All right, then next we have in Wyoming, you need to label the city Cheyenne. And then we have Colorado. You need to label Denver. Remember, you can be pausing this video as you go. Next, in New Mexico, which is down, it borders Texas, Santa Fe. You need to make sure you have Santa Fe labeled. Then in Texas, we have two cities we need to label. That is El Paso, which is over in the corner. And then down at the bottom, we have San Antonio. Okay, then in Kansas we have Albany and Dodge City. All right, then in Nebraska we have Ogallala. That's kind of a funny word to say. That's the city in Nebraska. Missouri, we have Kansas City, and no, Kansas City is not in Kansas, it's in Missouri. We're almost done labeling our important cities. Then in Illinois, we have Chicago. So just make sure all those cities are labeled on your map. All right, so down here at the bottom of Texas, again, you can be creative with how you want to show this on your map. You can see right here, there's an arrow and then it says brown, or maybe you want to use the coloring tool to kind of shade it brown, or you cannot even shade it and just have an arrow pointing to Range of Texas Longhorn. So you need to make sure that this is labeled because this is where a lot of the cattle were. So when those cowboys or when the ranchers came home from the Civil War, this is where a lot of them lived. It's the original home of the cattle. Now we're going to label the Chisholm Trail because remember we said it started in Texas. Well, Texas is a huge state. So it started down here in San Antonio because that's where all the cattle were. And they had to travel all the way on this Chisholm Trail. Remember, it was a hard journey. They had to get those cattle through those rivers. They had to get those cattle up and down on these hills in the deserts. It was dry, it was hot. They traveled through Oklahoma and then up to Kansas. So make sure that you have that line. And again, in your Google slide, you can even insert a shape and use an arrow. And you can even color that arrow red. So that is the Chisholm Trail. The next one that we're going to be labeling is the Western Trail. Remember, we had more than one way that they could take. So the Western Trail also started in the same place because that's where all the cattle were. But instead of stopping in Kansas, it stopped in Nebraska. And it did go through Dodge City as well. So make sure that you have your Western Trail labeled in blue. And then we are not going to worry about labeling the green trail because we do not have to know that here in Georgia in 5th grade. So we do not need to label the green one. All right, next we have our railroad. So you can be creative with how you label your railroad. It doesn't have to have all of these lines and dashes all the way through it. As long as you have an arrow pointing to what it is, or in your map key, you have a specific color, then that's fine. So that is the Central Pacific Railroad. So as you can see, the Central Pacific Railroad, do you think that the Chisholm Trail could have gotten their cattle on that one? Nope, that was for the Western Trail. See how the Western Trail meets right there. So that started in California and it went all the way across. Next, we have the Southern Pacific Railroad. The Southern Pacific Railroad started in Los Angeles. It went down to El Paso, went up through Kansas, and then it connected. So that was the other railroad that they could have taken their cattle to. Then we have the Union Pacific Railroad. As you can see, these arrows are pointing to the Union Pacific. Now the Union Pacific, you can see that the Chisholm Trail, they were able to get onto this railroad. And then you can see again, they connect right here. And then this is a close-up of the map key. Remember, you do not have to label this green trail. As long as you have the Chisholm Trail and the Western Trail and then the railroads labeled, you are good. And then this is a finished product of what your map should look like. So again, if you need to pause right here and check your map to make sure that you have all of these trails labeled, the railroads and these states and the cities, Go ahead and check yours, and then when you are finished labeling everything, you can submit your assignment on Google Classroom.